the opportunity to contribute to the debate on this motion, which you quite rightly pointed out, is a very important matter. Mr. Speaker, we are gathered in this chamber to take a decision on the fate of the Finance Minister through this motion of censure. Mr. Speaker, may I respectfully submit that motions of censure among motions constitutes one of the most important, grievous, consequential motions that can be brought before a parliament. Mr. Speaker, they are not put before a house lightly. They must be well motivated. They must be on solid grounds. They must be on grounds which suggest that a minister who has been nominated by the president, who's received the prior approval of parliament, and who's been appointed by the president, the parliament itself is now sending a message to the president that the president should remove such a minister from office. Mr. Speaker, if you indulge me, in the American Constitution of 1789, Mr. Speaker, the motions of censure against their own members of Senate, Mr. Speaker, have only been invoked since 1789 9 times. Mr. Speaker, it tells you the gravity of motions of censure. Mr. Speaker, in the House of Commons, Mr. Speaker, in the House of Commons in the United Kingdom, ministers of state were hitherto impeached. The process was found to be cumbersome, and subsequently, the impeachment procedure was replaced with motions of censure. But, Mr. Speaker, even in the House of Commons, it is invoked to reprimand the minister. And even when it is invoked to reprimand the minister, Mr. Speaker, it is rarely invoked. Mr. Speaker, I make these points just to establish the point that the exercise we are engaged in here today is a very important exercise. Mr. Speaker, the precedent we set today will guide this House, will guide subsequent government, will guide our country and its democracy. It may be somebody else from the other side, it may be somebody from our side. And so, Mr. Speaker, the grounds on which the Minister for Finance is being called, or the grounds on which the motion seeks to censure the Minister for Finance, must be well grounded. Mr. Speaker, that is why I want to respectfully refer the House to the report of your ad hoc committee, which has been laid before this House and which should guide all of us. Mr. Speaker, the first ground on which the proponents of this motion is calling on this House to censure the Finance Minister. Mr. Speaker, if you allow me, I'll read it. Ground 1 says, despicable conflict of interest ensuring that he directly benefits from Ghana's economic woes as his companies receive commissions and other unethical contractual advantage, particularly from Ghana's debt overhang. Mr. Speaker, the ground is on conflict of interest. And Mr. Speaker, if you allow me, I will refer the House to the case, the celebrated case, and the locus classicus of Okudioto Ablako and another, number 2 versus the Attorney General and another, number 2, 2012, 2 Supreme Court of Ghana Law Report at page 845, where Brobe JSC, in commenting on conflict of interest, had this to say, Mr. Speaker, and I quote him, and it's in the report. The complaint of conflict of interest made by the plaintiff against public officers, all the officials of the Lands Commission, and those of the Ministry of Water Resources, Works and Housing, will be dismissed because specific remedy has been provided under Article 287 of the 1992 Constitution, which requires complaints of conflict of interest against public officers. It goes on and on. Mr. Speaker, the point I seek to make, this is the ground on which our friends, our honorable friends from the other side, are inviting this House to set a precedent for the censure of the Finance Minister. Mr. Speaker, respectfully, I will submit that this ground is weak, and I think that the committee itself recognizes that, and that this cannot be a ground on which, a serious motion such as a motion of censure will be led to remove a Finance Minister. Mr. Speaker, I take you to the report again, and I take you to Ground 3, the third ground on which the motion of censure is hinged. And Mr. Speaker, that ground indicates illegal payment of oil revenues into offshore accounts in flagrant violation of Article 176 of the 1992 Constitution. Mr. Speaker, the committee itself, in commenting on this ground, ground 3, and the ground on which they are calling on this august House of Parliament to censure the finance minister, the committee itself had this to say, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, it's found at page 22 of the report. The committee, having regard to the above evidence by PIAC, that they could not confirm that the Minister for Finance was responsible for the non-payment of the oil liftings by John into the PFH, and the evidence of GMPC that the payments were made into JOHL's offshore account by the buyer of the crude under the instructions of JOHL, and that the Minister for Finance played no role, decided that the Honorable Minister was not enjoined to lead evidence in defense of the said ground 3. Mr. Speaker, this is what we have been invited to participate in. This is what the committee itself, your own committee, your own ad hoc committee, made the finding on ground 3 that the finance minister played no role. Mr. Speaker, and I can go on and on and on. If you want, I'll take you to ground 5, where they talk about fiscal recklessness leading to the crash of the Ghana cedi, and it goes on, and the finance minister responds very copiously, comprehensively, and the response is captured in the report. Mr. Speaker, so all the grounds, beginning from ground 1 to ground 6, as captured in this report. First of all, ground 1 itself was legally untenable, was unconstitutional, could not be entertained by the committee. The committee itself jettisoned ground 1. The Speaker, ground 3 itself, the committee actually asked the Minister for Finance not to lead evidence on ground 3 because they themselves had found out that the proponents of the motion were erroneous, including ground 3 into the grounds on which the motion was brought. Mr. Speaker, the conclusion of my submission really, Mr. Speaker, and I say this with a lot of passion, that what we seek to do in this House and the decision we take on this motion must be well motivated. Because, Mr. Speaker, today it is Finance Minister Ofori-Atta. Tomorrow it may be Finance Minister Atufose. Someday, it may be someday. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I want to contend, Mr. Speaker, I want to contend that today, for political expediency and for political scoring, it may be Minister Ken Ofori-Atta. Mr. Speaker, 20, 30 years from now, it may be the turn of Finance Minister Atufose. Mr. Speaker, when that day arises, if it ever did, and if I was found on the other side of this House, Mr. Speaker, principle will prevail, facts will prevail, evidence will prevail, propriety will prevail, and I will not support a motion of censure on this nature, which seeks to censure a minister when it is not well grounded. Mr. Speaker, the whole country, thankfully and mercifully, the whole country saw the finance minister before the committee. Yeah. And I have a lot of respect for this House, so do I for the committee. The committee did a great job, and the committee is a distinguished committee of this House. But clearly, any objective-minded Ghanaian cannot help but come to the conclusion that Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta distinguished himself before the committee, that he acquitted himself, and that he demonstrated beyond doubt that he's in full grace and full command of the Ghanaian economy, and that the measures he's putting in place, Mr. Speaker, just as his party and government did from 2017 to 2020, when we inherited an IMF economy, and when all the macroeconomic indicators and indices were in disarray, but we brought it back on track and took this country on growth and prosperity, that this finance minister, and the economic management team of the government and the government of President Akufo-Addo is doing just that. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I urge my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, that we take these matters very seriously. These are grievous, weighty matters before this House. The country is watching us. Africa is watching us. And I should indeed say the world is watching us. Because Ghana is a beacon of democracy. We continue to be pace-setters. A motion is being put in place, but it is clear that this motion is not well grounded. It is clear that the pillars on which this motion was moved are weak. Ground 1 is being rejected. Ground 3, the committee itself did not even take evidence on it. And the other grounds are not well motivated. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, this motion should fall and fail.